Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining in here today. At the start, I would first like to introduce Manisha and Atul, who are here with us today to support the live sign language translation of the discussion. For them to be able to interpret, we request all the participants to speak at a steady pace, please. We've also enabled live captions, and you can read through that if you would like, although they might not be 100% accurate. With that, let's get started. I'm Sophia Islam, and on behalf of the Institute for Transportation and Development Policy, ITDP, and the National Institute of Urban Affairs, NIUA, I extend a very warm welcome to everyone. Esteemed speakers, panelists, colleagues from ITDP and NIUA, and all the participants who are joining us here today. Over the last 2 decades, we at ITDP have been working to transform urban transport systems across the country with improvements in walking, cycling, and public transport infrastructure. With the primary objective of scaling up this transformation across the country, we launched the Urban Log Capacity Development Program to enable a dialogue on urban mobility. And today, we are proud to host this webinar as part of the Urban Log webinar series in collaboration with the Building Accessible, Safe, and Inclusive Indian Cities, the BASIC program of the NIUA. The BASIC program has been actively working to mainstream disability inclusion in the urban agenda. And as we progress with the webinar, we are delighted to see more than 40 participants joining us today, and we can see more people joining in as we speak right now. This webinar, for your information, is also being recorded, and the video will be shared on NIUA and ITDP channels on YouTube and other social media handles. With that, once again, I extend a very warm welcome to everyone. I will now take a few minutes to set the context for today's webinar. As you might be aware, the International Day of Persons with Disabilities is a United Nations Day that is celebrated every year on the 3rd of December. On this occasion, today we will deep dive into the topic through an expert deliberation on the role of innovative policies and technology in steering the inclusion of persons with disabilities in the mobility ecosystem. The mobility ecosystem includes transportation options that go far beyond the traditional car ownership. And to simply put it, I would say mobility is independence. It is the ability to freely move around our cities on our own. And this independence brings a better quality of life, low levels of social exclusion, and hence the ability to participate equally. Therefore, we need to be cognizant of the why and how to ensure mobility for all. And in this context, we strongly believe that it is critical to share knowledge, learn from each other, and grow together to plan, design, and strategize better for all the marginalized groups. The webinar today aims to celebrate homegrown best practices and innovations, as well as diagnose the underlying problems to address accessibility issues in the urban mobility ecosystem. Let me now take you through a brief overview of our agenda for today. We will start with a welcome address by Mr. Hitesh Vaidya, Director, NIUA. The webinar is then divided broadly into 2 parts. The first part will have presentations from the implemented innovations and best practices. The second part will have a panel discussion and a brief question and answer session with the audience. We will conclude the webinar with the summarization and way forward. And through the webinar, we also aim to stress the need to prioritize the rights and well-being of persons with disabilities, thereby making them active contributors to the growth of the country's economy. I'm sure all of us are looking forward to hearing more about the subject from the experts, but before we get into the sessions, few points to keep in mind. I would request all the panelists to turn on their cameras if you feel comfortable, and all the attendees to please feel free to drop in your comments in the chat box as we proceed with the webinar. We will take as many as possible towards the end of the webinar. We also encourage all of you to please share your suggestions and feedback to help us keep improving the webinar as we move forward. And I also request all the panelists to please keep themselves on mute at all times to enable an uninterrupted setting for the speakers. With that, I now invite Mr. Hitesh Vaidya, Director, NIUA, to give the welcome address. Mr. Vaidya brings in more than 2 decades of broad-based urban development policy, project formulation, implementation, and program management experience on mainly UN, World Bank, US Agency for International Development assignments. Prior to joining as the Director of National Institute of Urban Affairs, he was the country representative of UN Habitat in India. He was part of the team supporting in designing and rolling out national urban flagship missions, smart cities, and Atal Mission for Urban Rejuvenation and Transformation in India. I would now invite Mr. Hitesh Vaidya to please give us the welcome address. Over to you, sir.
Good afternoon, everyone. And thanks for joining. Thanks, first of all, ITDP and NIUA team to have having me here. A warm welcome. As Sophia said just now, we are actually celebrating International Day of Persons with Disabilities. And the idea of this webinar is not only to talk about awareness about the inclusion, how do we mainstream inclusion in our planning process, but also to really start celebrating the little successes we had till now. It's very easy to be harsh on ourselves. We are not doing, but I think the work which ITDP has done in Chennai and all of you in your own respective fields, I think that time has come to start celebrating our own successes. So first of all, welcome all of you, all the panelists, all the experts, and all the participants who have joined, because even Sophia said that there are 40 participants. I think these are 40 ambassadors or 50 ambassadors which have come because we need everyone to really fill up this hole while we are talking about inclusion, our mainstream inclusion, because that's the way we want to do, because till now, talking about disability, talking about this was invisible thoughts, and we as all the partners, we are making invisible visible. So every effort, every participation is really appreciated. And IUA has been working on this area for quite some time, and we are trying to create a enabling environment where we can start talking about how our built environment become accessible and safe, how our cities become accessible and safe. While we are talking about SDG 8, which talks about livelihood, knowledge, skills, others, we talk about SDG 10, which talks about innovations, tools, and good practices, which I think during the discussion will be shared with all of us. So I think these good practices, it's very nice to say I have done this is a good practice in one city or two. The challenge with the National Institute of Urban Affairs or a think tank like ITDP, we always, how do we scale it up? And I think scale is the big challenge. What we learn in one city, how do we create that tool or that template or that technology or that training so that it gets scaled up? Because the challenge, if one city can address these issues, others can very well address. So the scaling is a challenge with all of us. And that's what we are striving. While we have done a lot of good projects and we can pat our backs, but idea is one project, one thing is need to be now created in such a way that people start looking at it and appreciating it and saying that, okay, this is the way we can do it. So while we are talking about it, with NIUA and with the support of partners, there is a 5-pronged approach which NIUA is trying to look at to mainstream inclusion in the planning process. And the first thing, while we are talking about in this topic of this year's, which is a role of innovative policies and technology in steering inclusion of person with disability in mobility ecosystem, the idea which will be any innovation, any technology, will the first point of discussion will be, is there a data for decision making? So first thing which NIU is trying to look at is trying to create that data systems where the decision maker at the city level start looking at where are the challenges, how do I address these challenges, what are the issues. So putting data for decision making is our first priority, the way we are looking at it. Second thing which we I think we'll be discussing is, how do you really, you can't have only data, you need a technology for transformation. So how do you bring technology which is bring value for money for the decision maker at a city level, because there are a number of technology. What works for me may not work for other. So what is the technology? And it has to be very, very context specific. So that's the area where we are working on a lot of handholding and support on technology for transformation. Third thing, while we all talk about inclusion and accessibility, unless this inclusion and accessibility is integrated in
We'll wait for a few seconds. I think there's some network issue.
that, then there can be a harmonization between vertical harmonization as well as horizontal harmonization of the thinking. Fourth is, and while we are talking about going from transformative pathways to move from X to Y, to go from X to Y. Is it a planning pathway? Is it a regulation pathway? Is it a partnership pathway? We have to look at combination of all these pathways, what it will be. And when I was thinking about different pathways, I was thinking even in our mythology, in Bhagavad Gita, it has said that you can have a god with a root of karma, root of knowledge, root of action, and root of prayers, with just thinking that things will happen on its own. So we as a partners, we all are trying to define those pathways, which is action oriented, research oriented, or learning from each other and looking at it. So we have to define these pathways for us. And last, which is, and that's why we are here today, is none of us have a solution which is ready to go. We all need to braid our brains together. We all need to start thinking together. We all need to do aggregation of our ideas, which we can then define what is that collective a discussion or collective route which we want to take, because we all talk about move away from business as usual approach to a new approach, but business as usual approach to new approach will come only if we deliberate and discuss. So these are the 5 areas where an IUA is trying to build that urban ecosystem where we start thinking, we bring partners together to start looking at it, because all of us are talking about, through SDGs or through Paris Agreement or through Sendai framework, whatever we talk about, we are all talking about finding out that that promised land which we all want to go. And this promised land, if we want to take that journey to that promised land, has to come through the planning process, regulatory process, legal process, and a partnership way. Otherwise, we all will be going here. The focus with us is while everybody talks about, and there are experts who will talk about
Hitesh sir got logged off. We'll wait for a couple of seconds for him to join back.
I'm back. Okay. So the important is who will do it, and NIU is all efforts are focusing on who is that the existing practitioners will do it. Also, the young leaders, the future leaders of the country. So we are looking at how do we make that exciting for the young people to really start thinking about these issues. So that's where we are. We are working on our efforts. The broad objective and with the ITDP and all the partners we all have is is that the big intentions of SDGs and all. How do you convert them to action at the ground level? So it's a moving from intention to action. Second is, while it's very nice to have a headlines on the paper that we are doing it, the question is these headlines have to be get now converted to details, and that's where we are focusing. How do you convert these headlines to details is another. And third is, we all maybe beat our chest and say that this has been done, but the question is the big numbers which we talk about, and if you look at NITI's report and all, they talk about big numbers, but actually at a granular level, how this really work. And I those are the issues we have to do. Our big thinking has to come to a granular thinking. What are those at a city level in a master plan? If that is the planning instrument, how do I mainstream inclusion into that? And those are actions which we need to really require. I do agree that if I look at the three broad objective which the government of India is actually trying to do is talking about the use of technology is for this mantra, which is Man Ki Baat and or other things, at the policy level thinking, to Jantra, which is people's voice, and linking Tantra, which is technology, linking the policy and practice people together. And that's how I think our mythology says that all three of them have to work together to really bring that result out. So I wish this deliberation a big success, and I thank ITDP to associate with NIUA to bring out this, inclusion, in particular in the mobility aspects. How do we bring that together? What are those options available? Because as think tanks or as a practitioners working, we can look at different practices, give them this option work here, this option did not work here. These were the learnings from each option, and then the choice each city has to be based on their own context. And that learnings can be given to the cities, and they can make those choices. But I think that freedom to make choices has to be given, rather than just telling that this is the right solution, and all the cities have to work their own solution. But I think this is a great area where we start deliberating, discussing, because more and more we deliberate, more and more we discuss, we will get a granularity of different types of practices, what works, what does not work within Indian context, because we cannot have Mumbai or Delhi becoming Singapore or Shanghai, because we have to make Delhi and Bombay. And for that, how do we mainstream and include, bring different types of people into the planning with all the stakeholders and meet the broad objective of SDGs is a challenge which all of us are working on. And I think the only way to reach to that solution is through this type of dialogue. So I wish you all the success, and I look forward to a great learning from this deliberation. And I hope the deliberations will bring out some kind of a policy direction, which jointly we can then share with the government of India, which then can be either part of some kind of a new mission or a new thinking which government of India is doing, get part of that thinking, so that it gets scaled up to a larger constituency of 4,000 urban local bodies. So with that, thank you very much for having me here.
Thanks a lot for giving New Town Kolkata a chance to present the implemented solution in this platform. First, a big congratulations to NIUA and ITDP for organizing such a seminar, such a webinar on this specific day. And I extend my warm regards to other speakers and the participants of this webinar as well. This is about the real-time passenger information display system for the public bus stops in Newtown, Kolkata. This is a very successfully implemented solution that we now have with us. This is a smart city project. As you must be knowing, Newtown is a small city, about 30 square kilometer area and having around 1 lakh population in the city, located in the southeastern fringe of the city of Kolkata. Here we have many interventions towards ensuring the disabled friendly environment for the citizens and the passengers of in our city, like barrier-free footpaths. We have more than 100 kilometers of such footpaths and cycle tracks having tactile blocks. Ramps are present in public bus stops, and the most recent addition to these all are the real-time passenger information display system that we have with us running successfully. If we just present in a very brief manner the high-level architecture of the system, I can present that. It has a decentralized architecture with RFID readers installed in each bus stop to detect the RFID tags installed in the buses. The LED displays have onboard computer with localized artificial intelligence engine for auto calculation of predicted expected time of arrival of the buses and transmit the data to the next bus stops. Multiple sources of data such as RFID, GPS were available, and Pathodisha app of Government of West Bengal and Google traffic data are used to calculate the ETA. Intelligent decision-making algorithms determine the priority of buses to display in the LED board. The bus data is transmitted in real time to the cloud server to display in the online dashboard for monitoring. A smart algorithm utilizes bus RFID data to determine route of the buses and the next bus stops for arrival. We have this program installed in at present 29 bus stops of Newtown along the major arterial road of in Newtown city, having a length of about 11.9 kilometer, and along another parallel road having another 7 to 8 kilometer length. And the buses covered, number of buses covered under this system are more than 600, including the government buses. These are some, technical components and features of the system. As you can see, as I have already said, the ultra high frequency RFID reader is present, high visibility LED display board is present, vandal-proof tough glass, automated vandalism detection system, etc. Battery backup, RFID, everything is present here. The most important is the RFID tags are very handy, very convenient to be pasted on a particular vehicle, and we are approaching the various vehicle, private and government vehicle transportation system owners to have that RFID tag on their vehicle so that that can be read in our sensors. Whenever a bus enters Newtown, within the zone of Newtown, we can detect its movement and anticipate its arrival in the bus stops, time of arrival. Now we have very prominently specific disabled friendly features installed present in this system. There is public address system to announce bus arrivals. Auditory alerts are there for people who are visually impaired. There are alarms and audio tones for announcement of buses. Whatever is on the display board, it gets announced. Tactile floors are there in some bus stops. High visibility amber colored display is there so that the display can be visible from long distance, and low ramps are there in many bus stops for convenience of specially abled persons, for wheelchair movers. Apart from this, we have in these bus stops, we have free water ATM to dispense drinking water, pure drinking water. Kiosks are present for livelihood generation of small shopkeepers. Free charging machines are available, charging points are available in these bus stops, and backlit maps of the city are available. Newspaper and magazine stands are available, and these bus stops are, from safety and security point of view, they are foolproof in the sense they are fully covered by CCTV cameras, and fully monitored by, each CCTV camera is linked with the police monitoring system. This total system is monitored in a dashboard, and interdepartmental WhatsApp group is also present for real-time resolution of issues, whichever arise during the functioning. And the total dashboard and the total operation is being monitored and supervised from the ICCC platform of Newtown, Kolkata. This particular solution has already received some appreciation and accolades, recognitions from in various platforms, and we are very happy to share this in this platform. And most of all, I would like to conclude with the note that it's not only about the bus stops in the transport system. In various other fields also, Newtown, Kolkata is very sincere towards addressing the needs of specially abled persons, and we are planning. We already have the advantage of being in a planned city, totally planned city. Previously, having allocated roads and footpaths and specific zones, green zones. It's a green city. It has 48 green verges and parks and playgrounds. And we are very particular and sincere about modeling and planning the parks and playgrounds in the tune of the needs of the specially abled persons. And recently we have come up with a park with totally barrier-free walking path around 1.4 acre area, totally having barrier-free walking area. And starting from the road, the footpath, the toilets, everything is barrier-free in that park. And some more are in our list coming, with which we will be coming up very shortly. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Meghna, for sharing the design and technology integration at the smart public bus stops in Newtown, Kolkata. And glad to hear that the work is already being recognized. We look forward to a scale up and growth in that area in your city as well.
Thank you so much.
At this point, a reminder to the attendees to feel free to drop in any comments, suggestions, any questions that you may have for the presenters, and we'll take these up at the end of the webinar. Our next presenter for this session is Mr. Ravindra Singh, founder and CEO of MyUdan. MyUdan is a mobile application that offers a first in the industry accessibility and mobility assisted service. Among the many recognitions and awards received by Mr. Ravindra, he was also one of the winners of the first cohort of Smart Solutions Challenge and Inclusive City Awards jointly organized by NIUA and UNRCO. With that, I invite Mr. Ravindra. Please share your screen and your presentation with us.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this opportunity. So my name is Ravindra Singh. I am the founder of MyUdan. So like when I was 8 months old, I was affected with polio. And as I started growing, I realized I was not able to venture out. And like that was creating a hurdle problem, like I was not doing as a person. And soon I realized like limited mobility is the biggest challenge, not only for people with disability, but anyone with limited mobility. And that's how I started working on MyUdan. One day, surfing across the internet, I came across the hand-driven vehicle. And that has changed my life completely. That gave me the independence. Same experience I want to give back to the community with MyUdan. So MyUdan is a single epicenter app that connects product, technology, and services, creating India's first mobility ecosystem. Before moving ahead, I'll just play a small video just to give you an idea like what we do and how we do.
आपको कैसा महसूस होगा अगर आप जब चाहो तब बाहर नहीं जा सकते? दिन भर बस टीवी है आपका साथी हो। ये लॉकडाउन की नहीं बल्कि पर्सन्स विद डिसेबिलिटीज की रोज की कहानी है। पर ये कहानी अब बदलेगी। माय उड़ान इसे बदलेगा। और इस कहानी में वो जब चाहे तब वो बाहर जाएंगे और मनपसंद जगह घूमेंगे। माय उड़ान पेश करता है इंडिया की पहली ऑन डिमांड व्हीलचेयर असिस्टेंस सर्विस। जब आपके माता पिता बीमार बिस्तर पे पड़े हों और आप चाहते हो कि उनको कोई बहुत अच्छा हेल्पर मिले, आप जानते हो ये बहुत मुश्किल है और ट्रेन्ड हेल्पर अर्जेंटली मिलना, वो भी रीजनेबल कॉस्ट पे, ये तो नामुमकिन। पर अब माय उड़ान के साथ आप आसानी से एक क्लिक में बुक कर सकते हैं ऑन डिमांड एक्सपर्ट केयर गिवर। कुछ लोग चल नहीं सकते, तो क्या इसीलिए उन्हें दुनिया देखने का कोई हक नहीं? बिल्कुल है, और हम दिलाएंगे वो हक। उन्हें घूमने का मौका देंगे जब वो चाहे तब। हम ला रहे हैं पीपल्स शेयर्ड मोबिलिटी, जिसे हम कहते हैं माय उड़ान्स वी गो। व्हील चेयर यूज करने के लिए कोई ट्रांसपोर्ट नहीं है। वो रिक्शा या टैक्सी में नहीं जा सकते। उन्हें चाहिए एक्सेसिबल व्हीलचेयर टैक्सी। हम लाए हैं कंप्लीट मोबिलिटी सॉल्यूशन।
So as you mentioned, so we provide complete mobility solutions, end-to-end mobility solutions. And as we have seen, like the target audience is huge, like more than 170 million people need this kind of services. And as per the latest government data, like by 2050, there would be more than 320 million people who will be needing these services. And like over a period of year, we have earned good credibility into this market, and we have gathered 5-star ratings across social media platform. And also we have received a very good support and mentorship from almost all social incubators from India and abroad. And our work has been recognized by various teams. Like we were awarded with NCPEDP National Award, and also latestly NITI Aayog released the list of emerging mobility ecosystem. So we were among that. NASCOM Foundation has also appreciated our work, and then we received Inclusive Business Award for our work that we do. And yes, thank you. So we are here to create a mobility ecosystem that is our passion to give freedom and independence to all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ravindra, for this innovative contribution and for sharing it with us today, the integration of technology for inclusive mobility. With that, I would now like to invite our third presenter for this session, Ms. Meera Sundarajan, Gender and M&E expert and team lead at the Gender and Policy Lab, Greater Chennai Corporation. Ms. Meera is a social development professional with over 2 decades of experience in the social sector. She has worked with the government, NGOs, and corporate entities as a monitoring and evaluation lead, gender expert, and program manager. She holds a bachelor's degree in agriculture and a master's degree in social work from the Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Mumbai. With that, I invite you, Ms. Meera, to please share a presentation with us.
I'm part of what is called the Gender and Policy Lab of the Greater Chennai Corporation. So I'll begin by setting the context and then talk a little bit about our journey and what we do. Now, as we all know, there are two important aspects which promote empowerment of women and persons with disability. Now, basically, if we have freedom of mobility and ease of access to public spaces, it opens up economic opportunities, access to education, particularly higher education, access to healthcare, and the ability to form and leverage social networks, and the right to leisure and the right to wander. So these are opportunities that open up, when we have, and mobility as an issue is addressed. when we have cities, there are a lot of planners here, architects, but women and persons with disability experience public spaces in a city differently. As we all know, cities are designed to benefit the able-bodied and the male user. And the infrastructure and the service barriers in accessing public transport, lack of safety, and social norms severely limit the work, education, and life choices of women, girls, as well as persons with disability. And then there is sexual harassment on public transport and in public spaces, which goes widely unreported. This is especially worse if there is a woman with disability. The government of Tamil Nadu is one of the pioneers in addressing many issues with respect to disability. There are more than 26.8 million people in disabled persons in India, of which 1.18 billion live in Tamil Nadu with some kind of disability. And as we know, persons with disabilities suffer worse health outcomes, lower educational achievement, lower levels of economic engagement, and higher rates of poverty. Among persons with disabilities, 45% are illiterate and only about 26.5% have completed secondary education. TN has been awarded as one of the states which has done considerable work in terms of empowering persons with disability. We as a state are leading in the unique ID creation database for persons with disability. And the Tamil Nadu government has recently rolled out what is called the Teach at Home scheme for differentially able children of the state. Through this scheme, the government aims to provide both education and special services to the differentially able children at their place of residence. An outlay of 7.8 crores has been allocated for this. And women with disabilities experience the combined disadvantage, as I had mentioned earlier, of gender and disability. And recent World Bank research shows that Tamil Nadu has only 1/3 of women with disabilities are employed compared to almost half of men with disabilities. So there is a kind of there is a differential here too. I'll take a little bit through mobility because we are the Gender and Policy Lab, and one of our issues is to address the aspect of women's access and safety in public spaces. There is an interesting study which has been done by the World Bank, which looks at that 37% of all female trips are through walking when compared to 26% of male trips. Fewer women own vehicles. And besides walking, women also use a lot of public transport, and women travel off-peak hours. And for men, two-wheelers are the most dominant mode of transport, while women's modes of transport are far more diverse. And if we look at addressing the issue of access and mobility for women and for persons with disability, we found there are some things which have little or no effect. If you look at straightforward procurement projects, which are very infra-based, and if we work without any changes at the policy level, and just standalone interventions without a broader plan, and just some brief training programs and social media campaign without an on-the-ground advocacy campaign, or working only with women, girls, and persons with disability, and not working with a larger population. These have little or no effect. But what has good effect we've seen is that the gaps are deeply studied, a theory of change is prepared, an action plan, and monitoring and evaluation plan is made, and mechanisms for implementation are identified, resources and budgets are provided. Now, I'll take you through our journey. Basically, we are part of what is called the Chennai City Partnership Program, and we are funded by the Nirbhaya Fund. So basically, there was a study done in 2021, March. There's a gap assessment which was done by World Bank team, and the findings and the recommendation was seen that there's a need for an institutional mechanism for coordinating the gender program was suggested in September. And we were established in February. There are three of us. So, we have a policy expert, a capacity building, and a training expert, and there's me. And in April, we prepared an action plan, and we have a 3-year action plan. We have a 3-year program, which is in place. And we started our activities from May 2022. So as I mentioned earlier, the Government of Tamil Nadu Nirbhaya Fund project, there's an apex steering committee, which includes the monitoring of all the implementing agencies, and the implementing agencies are the Greater Chennai Corporation, Greater Chennai Police, the Metropolitan Transport Authority, and the Social Welfare Department. And we have the working group consisting of officers from some of the key departments that work on women's safety. And we have a voluntary advisory committee. And these are all people who are part of a working group. And the voluntary advisory committee consists of representatives from civil society organizations. And that we also engage with external organizations for carrying out surveys, etc. I'll just quickly take you through our projects. One is that if you look at one of the pillars of our work, this assessment of the ground situation. We are organizing a citywide perception study of women's safety in public spaces. And this is going to be a citywide study covering the respondents, 3,000 odd respondents. And there will be specific focus on, with persons with disability, the focus group discussions that we do. We want to understand what is their perception of safety. And then we are doing gender and disability inclusivity and usage audits of public infrastructure. We're also doing an online survey to understand the usage of parks maintained by the Greater Chennai Corporation. And within that, we're trying to understand how disability access is happening. And then we're looking at infrastructure like the bus shelters in the city to see whether they're safe for women and they're easily accessible to persons with disability. And we're looking at the whole complaints. There is a helpline that the corporation has. We're trying to analyze the complaints out of that and see what is a follow-up action taken. And within that, we are also trying to see whether these online portals are more accessible to persons with disability. And in terms of the policy, the Greater Chennai Corporation runs under the NULM program, runs homeless shelters for persons with who are homeless. And amongst that, there are shelters for disabled persons who are homeless. And as a part of updating the standard operating procedures, for this, we brought in the recommendations from the harmonized guidelines and brought it into the SOPs of the shelter. And we're also looking at the issue of the white paper on safety of women in public spaces, the governance and the budgetary challenges. And within that, we look at issues of persons with disability. And we're doing a considerable amount of capacity building and training. We're doing a safety audit of specific spaces. We are engaging with an organization in Delhi called Safety Pin. And we are engaging with other departments, the police, the Habitat Development Board, and civil society organizations. And as part of our work, we are also working with the schools. The Greater Chennai Corporation runs about 280 plus schools. They have gender clubs which have been formed, and we are training the teachers on implementing activities for the gender clubs. And we have conducted a gender and disability workshop along with NIUA, and the recommendations of that is trickled down to the zonal level, where we are trying to see the harmonized guidelines are being incorporated in parks and bus stops. And in terms of infrastructure services, we have brought out a whole list of do's and don'ts for parks. This has included a number of suggestions for improving access, which includes access for disability and ensuring that it is in accordance with the harmonized guidelines. And we're trying to see how the bus shelters, the new RFPs which are going out, we have given a lot of design input so that it becomes safer. And it's also easier for persons with disabilities and mothers of children with disability to use and access. And then we are also looking at safety enabling infrastructure like street lights, footpaths, especially the footpaths, making it easier for persons with disabilities to use. And something interesting, Chennai has got what is called sensory parks. There are 2 sensory parks which are maintained by the community, and now which are specifically used for children with disability to use, to be part of. One is in Santom and one is in Koturpuram. And now we have a beach. There is a big walkway which was recently inaugurated on Sunday by Honorable Chief Minister, which makes it possible for persons with disabilities, a ramp that goes right up to the beach, from the beach right up to the water. And there is that's something that is, actually, I believe we are the first state to have something like that. And there's a smart ticketing, announcement in buses, audible signals for traffic. These are being in the process of getting sanctioned, and examples of using technology to address inclusion and mobility in spaces. So I'll close it there, close my presentation here. I'd like to remember what Stevie Wonder has said. We need to make every single thing accessible to every single person with disability. Thank you. We have a YouTube video. I think if you have time, this has it's on the YouTube. It shows the whole thing about how the marina ramp has been now open to the persons with disability, and elderly people to use, and it goes right up to the sea. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Meera, for ending on that wonderful quote as well. And thank you for taking us through the Gender and Policy Lab's journey and stressing rightly upon the 3-year action plan and the need for it to pave the way for more inclusive urban development. With this, we come to an end for the first part of the webinar. Thank you to all the presenters for taking the time and effort to share your success with us today. We will now move into the second part of the webinar, which is the panel discussion. For that, I invite Ms. Kanika Bansal from the basic program at NIUA to moderate the session and take the webinar forward. Over to you, Kanika.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sophia. We already had such a wonderful start to the webinar, showcasing the impactful work that has been happening through the length and breadth of the country. It is proven that every thought and every action that has been taken and has been discussed in the first part of the webinar has paved the way to to inclusion and contributing to the agenda of leave no one behind and no place behind. In a way, it is indeed India's journey to an inclusive future, and it's a pleasure that NIUA could also contribute to this vision through policy intervention, translating the policy intervention into tangible action, building capacity to mainstream inclusion and universal access in urban development. On this note, I would like to invite the esteemed and experienced set of experts we have with us today for the discussion, for the panel discussion. So just to give a brief introduction, I would request my colleagues to post the detailed introduction in the chat box. We have with us Mr. Rajiv Ratori. He's a veteran in the social sector with disability rights as his core area of work and has received the Limca Book of Records Person of the Year Award in the 2016. We have with us Ms. Sonal Shah, the founder of the Urban Catalyst, and brings in a wide and multi-sectoral experience in catalyzing sustainable, gender equitable, and inclusive transport in cities. We have the next panelist is Mr. Apurv Kulkarni, another passionate expert working at the intersection of inclusion, accessibility, and mobility. Apurv is the head of research OMI Foundation, where he works tremendously on the accessibility track. We have with us Ms. Ashwati Dilip. She's the managing director of ITDP and brings with her vast experience in conceptualizing and implementing many innovation in policy and practice in the mobility sector. We have Ms. Sarika Chakrabarti, Senior Sector Coordinator at the National Institute of Urban Affairs, who brings with her nearly 2 decades of cross-sectoral experience in urban infrastructure and transportation planning works. I welcome all of you and thank you for taking out time from your busy schedule and joining us today for this much needed deliberation. Considering the immense and diverse experiences you all bring, I'm certain that this topic is both exciting and close to heart to each of you. We have identified a set of questions which we would like to investigate in this session. While we will be directing the question to a few of you, please add to the any comment or any suggestion you have to any question. Please feel free to add at any point in time. So to start with, I would like to start with the first question. Cities are the frontier of infrastructure development and opportunities, and we are envisioning to become one of the economic power and set example in many sectors, mobility being the enabler to access infrastructure and the socio-economic opportunities has transformed a lot. Over the last decades, the cities have started to create most streets and public spaces for people, and the conversation certainly has been more mainstreamed. However, has inclusive and universally accessible mobility option been equally mainstream? I would like to invite Mr. Rajiv Ratori, followed by Apurv and Sonal to answer this question.
Thank you. Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Kanika. And let me start off first by congratulating the NIUA and the ITDP for organizing this very, very important session today to commemorate the World Disability Day. So thank you so much for that. And you're so right that, yes, there's been a lot of dialogue over disability in the last 10 years. And disability is now being set the stage into a lot of discussions, a lot of policies which the government is coming out with. Now, if we look at but inclusion has really not happened as far as people with disabilities and the transport systems are concerned, especially the bus transport systems that we have in India today. If we look at the standards and the laws that we have today governing the accessibility for public transport users who are persons with disabilities, we have the Rights of Persons with Disability Act. Then we have the harmonized guidelines of the Ministry of Urban Development, which is followed by bus body code standards, which have been designed by the Ministry of Transport and Highways. And then we have the 052 and the ACE 153 standards, which are automotive industry standards. And all of these standards collectively define accessibility requirements of people with disabilities when it comes to transport system, the bus transport system. It includes things like driver communication button, handrails, the kind of supporting infrastructure which is required to board a bus, space for wheelchairs, safety straps for wheelchairs. So all of this has been divided in all these standards in the law. And whilst world over you look at low floor buses becoming the norm for intra-city transport, in India, this is not happening as yet. We still find that Indian states and the Indian governments, the state governments are still procuring high floor buses, which are not accessible for people who are using wheelchairs, for pregnant women, for children, for the elderly, as we don't have the supporting infrastructure required to board a high floor bus with dignity. So we recently also we've been seeing the states that some of the states who had earlier showed interest in procuring low floor buses, which are accessible for wheelchair users, are now shifting to high floor buses. So it's like we moved one step forward with the law, with the standards that we have defined, but it's taking 2 steps backward when the states go back to using the high floor buses for intra-city transport. So we really have to do something about this.
Thanks, Rajiv ji. Apur, would you like to add on your thoughts to it?
Thank you, Kanika. And yes, congratulations to NIUA and ITDP on hosting this webinar to commemorate the National Day for Persons with Disability. Just for those of the audience members who may not be, who may have some visual challenge, I'd like to describe myself. I'm a young man, black hair, wearing a spectacles, sporting a beard. I have a white shirt and a brown jacket on me. To respond to your question, Kanika, Rajiv ji has already outlined, the technical aspects, including the legal framework that's in place. I'd like to add to that the Accessible India campaign, which was launched in 2015 and has brought about some improvement, although the timelines are a moving target. And I think we hope that it will continue to bring about improvements in a more timely fashion going forward. With respect to the on-ground inclusion of infrastructure, I think the challenge in front of us is pretty huge. And it also requires action at a similar scale, which I think we've not seen right now. There have been a few good starts and interventions, such as the harmonized guidelines, which NIUA has issued for built environments. We also have some opportunities in front of us. So as our electrification journey to reach 30 at 30 goes on, I think there's a huge opportunity to ensure that we procure low flow buses. And Rajiv ji had mentioned that different cities and towns are moving back and forth with reference to procurement of these buses. I think it's hugely important. And what's important, in addition to looking at bus systems by themselves, or metro or local trains or other IPT systems by themselves, also taking a holistic view. in terms of having the entire trip chain really being made accessible. Over here, walkability of the infrastructure also plays a significant role. Just before the panel, the lady from Gender and Policy Lab, Chennai, explained the mobility patterns of people include, walking, and even for that matter, non-motorized mobility as a large chunk. I think having some of those infrastructures in place is extremely important. And therefore, while there is a need to pay attention to the policy formulation as a first start, rolling out policy and distributing it well as a second point, it's also important to implement that on the ground. And over here, I think specific targets and mandates, and also public disclosure of the progress being achieved vis-a-vis those targets by the individual urban bodies would go a long way in bringing about these changes. I'd like to conclude by saying that our Prime Minister has made a clarion call for the entire nation to double down and work towards building a developed India by in the next 25 years of Amrit Kal. This developed India's vision will not be possible unless we have an inclusive India's vision. And for that, the mobility and transport ecosystem also needs to be made inclusive so that we unlock the full power of our demographic dividend and we are able to create value not just for us, but also for the world.
Thank you, Apurv. Sonal, would you like to chime in here? Thank you.
Sure. Thank you to ITDP and NIUA for organizing this discussion. And I think the stage has been set very well by the previous speakers. And so what I'll do is I'll just build on it. And I think I'll kind of put it in two buckets. In response to your question, one is on the discourse, if you will, right? So what I am seeing also is that not only is there more recognition around creating cities for persons with different disabilities, but also now we are seeing that we're looking at the fact that we have gender, disability also coming together in order to also drive the agenda for universal access. Let me use a data point. It's old data because we don't have updated data from the census. As per 2011, able-bodied men in the age of 15 to 59 years constitute only 1/3 of our urban population, right? And therefore, 2/3 of our population are women, are children, are persons with disabilities, and so young youth, right? So like less than 15 years. And so here is a missed opportunity for us to really see how our cities, our infrastructure and our systems can be used by everybody. Because right now we're only designing for this 1/3, if you will, if you see the systems that are designed. So I think there is like I said, there's an increasing recognition. There's a recognition also that, let's say, if you design universal access will benefit multiple groups. It'll benefit children, it will benefit elderly, it will benefit persons with disabilities, pregnant women, people who are ill. Sometimes some of the disabilities are not visible, right? So there is this recognition as well, which we should all accept. In practice, I think I'm observing one key piece since 2016, since the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act. I feel it has really empowered civil society organizations to come and demand, precisely because of what Mr. Rajiv and Apurv have mentioned before. So we'll go into that a little bit more. So I think, at least there is some accountability that is being asked for. And I think in terms of practice, again, what I'm also hearing from my previous two panels and something that I agree with, that there is a need for institutionalization now, and happy to discuss that a little bit more, which is the financing, the expertise, consistent capacity development, and so on and so forth. Thanks.
Thanks, Sonal. I think the data which you had presented actually will be even more skewed because with the aging population, and in the next 20 years we'll be having a larger chunk of the aging population, and must be with the lifestyle which we are leading now, will definitely be having some sort of disability as well. On this note, I would all the point which has been brought out by Rajiv Ji, Apurv, and Sonal. I would like to invite Ashwati and Sarika to bring the flip side of the coin. I mean, we already have so many policies in place, and as Sonal rightly mentioned that the dialogue, the narrative has been changing to universal accessibility and inclusion. But what are the challenges which are faced by the policymakers and the urban practitioners to promote inclusion and universally accessible mobility options? Ashwati, would you like to take the first stab at it?
Sure, Kanika. I think Mr. Hitesh Vaidya, welcomed us, but with this moment of optimism, saying that we should celebrate our wins. Now, as we even reached our wins, there were many challenges that we had to overcome, and there continues to be these challenges as well. And going back to the speakers, Rajiv Ji, Apurv, and Sonal, I think they touched very, very, very valid points. And if I could go back and touch one of the points that Apurv made, where he said that as we're improving public transportation, walkability is very, very important. And when we were working with many of the urban local bodies on improving footpaths, we noticed that either this infrastructure was absent or it was very disconnected. Every gate, the footpath would stop, which means a person with limited or special abilities would not be able to travel. And in order to, so the point that I wanted to highlight is that as we create cities for persons with different abilities or limited abilities, it is in the details that the devil lies. That's a very, very important piece. And sometimes the pushback that we've received is that there is nothing there. Can we just, what you're asking for is 100%. Can we please improve it to 50%? What if we can have wider footpaths which are not continuous? But this means that, we are missing the point. If the person involved was a person with disability, he or she would never be making this point, because this would be extremely important for them. And what we did, which again, I'd like to touch Sonal's point, where she said capacity building is very important. In order to help the engineers transcend this thought process that they had, we invited them to use a wheelchair on the streets that they've already designed. This helped them understand that even an infrastructure that they thought was well thought of was not serving certain sections of the society. So that was very useful, and that's where I would say that touching the points that our previous speakers had mentioned. Now, another point that I've also noticed is, for example, the examples that Meera had shared from the gender lab. Often, when a particular department has full control over projects, they're able to bring these details in. However, in projects that require interdepartmental coordination, especially because not all stakeholders are equally bought into the idea, certain details get missed out, which then defeats the purpose. So to give you an example, in Chennai, we have a pedestrian plaza that was created in T Nagar, where there was a lot of engagement with various communities, including persons with disabilities, where details were put in place. Now, you have huge plazas on both sides, but the connection between the plaza was was not built by the traffic police, because they felt it would reduce the speeds of the traffic. So even if you have great footpaths, making sure that your crossing is at grade did not happen. So while a person with disability can move either sides, they cannot cross. This again defeats the purpose. So I would say getting the details right, that's where the devil lies. Two, we really need to bring multiple actors together so that we can now build and bring awareness in cities as a whole, because we cannot do piecemeal solutions. And let me pass it over to Sarika.
Thanks, Avasthi, and thank you to NIUA and ITDP for inviting me for this panel discussion. I agree with all the points that have been made, but I think I'll just like to present it slightly differently. When we talk about inclusive mobility, then I think we're talking about all the marginalized groups. We're not only talking about people with disability, okay? So we are talking about people, including the people with disability. We're talking about the urban poor, the elderly, the children, and the women. And there are multifaceted aspects, dimensions to inclusive mobility when you think about it. So there's one which is spatial, the other is social and economic, and the third one would be the digital one. So spatially, as a planner again, I keep on saying this, that we have to think about reducing the trip lengths and also the need to undertake a trip. So this could be done by integrating land use and transport. Will not go too much into details, but yeah, this is a planning concept which is being adopted by most master plans. Then comes creating accessible environments around the public transport stops, improving the last mile connectivities. And I quite agree with what Avasthi said. In fact, it was a very important point that we have to focus on the details. Now, because our offices at India Habitat Center, there's one gentleman that I've noticed on Lodi Road, and perhaps other colleagues at NIUA also have noticed him. He is a Sadaji with a wheelchair, and it's a battery operated wheelchair. And Lodi Road is in the South Delhi district of Delhi, very swanky area for people who are not familiar with Delhi. And we have these ramps to access the pedestrian pathways, but the detailing in the construction is flawed. So this gentleman, despite having a pedestrian footpath, dedicated right of way to actually, use his wheelchair on in a safe, carriageway, he is still forced to share a vehicular carriageway. So he is on the vehicular tarred road on his wheelchair always, and that battery operated wheelchair. So if this is the situation in South Delhi area of the city, then we can very well imagine what the situation in other parts of the city are. So yes, everything is about the detailing and about the execution. The third point also, which Mr. Rajivji made, was about procurement of certain type of infrastructure, low flow buses and on. And it was a shocker to me to hear that people started, procuring low flow buses, and then they reverted the decision. And now they're back to procuring normal buses. So this brings us, if we have to enable all these spatial things and the procurement things, then we have to think about, again, the second point with Avasthi made was about, why is this happening is because there's lack of integrated planning. And to enable integrated planning, what we need is institutional integration. Okay, and there are very few cities in India, I think around 15 or 17 of them now, which actually are, at least conceptually or on paper, have come up with a unified metropolitan transport authority. Okay, so we really need, if we are, of course, there is requirement of integrating or involving multiple actors into the decision making and planning. But if there is an authority like that, that will greatly facilitate this entire thing. The second point is about the social and economic aspect of inclusive mobility. So this particularly pertains to the urban poor, and all the strategies towards this would be pertaining to the fair rationalization. So, but of course, there is a challenge with that of reconciling financial sustainability with social inclusion. And because, and the risk over here is that there is a loss of fare box revenue, because majority of our public transport systems, they rely on the fare box revenue. In fact, Delhi Metro, which is hailed like one of the most progressive metro systems in the country, only 12% of its revenue comes from the non-fare box revenue. So we have to think about that how this works out. But yes, this is a very good, strategy to actually make public transport systems, the mobility systems of the city, accessible to the urban poor. There is another thing, the third aspect, which is the digital integration. This is very important, particularly from the point of making the transport ecosystem inclusive for people with disability. What happens is there are multiple apps and websites and devices available in the market to facilitate, say, a booking of a ride, or booking a shuttle, hiring a cab. But what happens, and there are also these passenger information systems, which are installed on bus stops and other transit stops. But most of them do not have, most of these user interfaces do not have audio and visual cues. Okay, so these things, these are not usable for the most marginalized groups. And although we do have a rights of PWD 2016 Act, which kind of mandates the government to establish standards for accessibility of technologies and communications, and also promotes universal design of electronic goods, despite that, we are having this issue now. One of the issues of digitalization also is that it has the risk of over digitalization. So there are many people, particularly the urban poor, who do not have access to digital technology. So in that case, they will perhaps never be able to, use this or get fully integrated with the mobility systems of the city, which are now highly relying on digitalization and ITS and other swanky systems. But data shows that 47% in 2022 in India, digital penetration, 47% of the population, this has already taken place. Now, if that data is true, and if this graph is climbing, then this perhaps will not be an issue in future. Now, coming to the point of universal accessibility, we do have these harmonized guidelines and space standards for barrier-free built environment 2021, and NIUA has been a party in developing these, the basic scheme of NIUA. And this although these guidelines are there, and there are various master plans in the city which actually refer to these guidelines. And because master plans are statutory documents, that kind of lends weightage to these guidelines. But at the end of the day, these guidelines are just mere guidelines. And unless you have statutory documents which refer to them or which mandate use of these guidelines will perhaps not get adopted fully. And this is a big, huge risk, in making our mobility systems inclusive. So why I'm saying that is that recently NITI Aayog came up with a report about urban planning capacities in India. Okay, and that report said that 65% of around 8,000 urban settlements in India, only 35%, 35%, 65% do not have master plans. So only 35% of them have master plans. Okay, so master plan, an instrument by which you can actually, lend some weight to these guidelines that only 35% of our urban settlements have. So that is one of the other limitations, also one of the challenges for promoting inclusive and universal accessible mobility options. I think I'll pause here. Thanks.
Thanks, Sarika. Thank you for the, both Ashwati and Sarika for advocating, a 360-degree approach that need to be actually adopted for an inclusive future and integration of inclusion and universal accessibility into mobility ecosystem. Although we are only having 15 minutes to the webinar, so I would like to request everyone to keep their answers very short. So coming to the third question, the RPWD Act actually mandate the government to ensure independent accessibility in all modes of transportation that conform with design standards, including retrofitting the old modes of transportation wherever technically feasible and safe for persons with disability and persons with all abilities and all the marginalized groups are able to use the transportation services and system with dignity and independence. Now, Rajiv Ji, my question is to you. In your experience, what has been the impact of the Right of Persons with Disability Act 2016 in addressing the challenges and making public transportation, particularly bus, railways, and airports, accessible to persons with disabilities?
So, thank you, Anika. So when it comes to the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act, we have section 40, we have section 41. So section 40 talks about formulating standards for accessibility for the built environment, for transport, for ICT services, etc., etc. And this is to be done with the active involvement of the Chief Commissioner for Persons with Disabilities. Now, these standards have been framed, and especially for transport accessibility. Then we have section 41, which in my opinion is a little weak because it only talks a little about what is to be provided in terms of accessibility. But then section 46 of this act is the most important section as far as transport accessibility is concerned. And it says that all public and private service providers have to provide services which conform to guidelines and standards which have been detailed in section 40 of the Act. So since these standards are already now in place, and there is section 46, which mandates for the implementation of these standards by all private and public transport providers. So this makes a sort of kind of a legal mandate that transport has to be accessible now for people with disabilities. If we look at, there is of course also the Supreme Court judgment in my matter, which I had filed in the year 2005, where Justice Sikri in 2017 has very clearly observed that all transport, whether private or public, has to be made accessible for people with disabilities. And this is not just confined to bus operating systems. This includes trams, taxis, railways, airlines, everything possible. And these are very clearly mentioned in the judgment of 2017. There has been some sort of a confusion here because in this particular petition, the government of India had filed the Accessible India campaign status. And the Accessible India campaign is a target which the government has given to itself. And there it says that 10% of the transport will be made accessible. Now, this confusion has created a lot of anomalies because when you go down to the states, there are some states which are saying that no, the judgment says only 10% of transport is to be accessible, but this is not so. This is a target given by the government to itself to create to target for 10% transport accessibility. Actually, if you look at the law, if you look at the judgment, it is for all transport systems, whether private or public, to be made accessible to people with disabilities. So the law is very, very powerful as far as transport accessibility is concerned. It also covers the railways and other transport systems. So 46 is very, very important for us. But in spite of all this, we find that implementation is very, very tardy. In fact, in the month of March, the Convergence Energy Services Limited floated tenders for 5,500 hybrid electric buses. And states responded. There were quite a few state capitals in particular who responded to this tender. And they ordered a mix of buses, 400 millimeter height, which is accessible for wheelchair users. Then you have the 650 millimeter height buses, which are somewhat accessible to wheelchair users with adaptations if you have provision of ramps, etc. And then you have the 900 millimeter buses, which are not accessible for wheelchair users, for elderly, for children, for pregnant women. So this mix was ordered by states, and in particular, Delhi and Bangalore preferred the 400 millimeter option, which is the accessible option. And Delhi, in fact, has been a real role model as far as this is concerned, accessibility buses is concerned. Almost 60% of their transport is low-floor buses. Bangalore too wanted to buy low-floor buses, but recently they have moved to high-floor buses. And then we had states like Maharashtra and Bengal who did not order for the accessible and the semi-accessible buses, but they all ordered for 900 millimeter buses. So this is, which is creating a problem. We had a meeting with the CEO of Convergence Energy Services Limited in May, in the month of May. In fact, we have a coalition known as the Freedom of Movement Coalition. And my fellow panelists, Apoor and I, are part of this coalition, along with other colleagues in the disability sector, people with disabilities, lawyers. So this Freedom of Movement Coalition met the CEO of Convergence Energy Services Limited, and we expressed our concerns that tenders are still being floated for inaccessible buses. We also met the mobility advisor in the NITI Aayog in the month of May itself and brought to his notice this anomaly which is coming up time and again. Unfortunately, though the meetings were very good, the post-meeting scenario result has not been encouraging. In fact, it's been quite disturbing for us because we expected a lot from the NITI Aayog. It's the apex planning body of the country. And if you're not heard by the apex planning body, then that's a problem. So this is a challenge for us that we need to ensure that transport is accessible. See, the 900 millimeter buses are inaccessible because dignified access is not ensured. You have to physically carry up a wheelchair person or a person with a locomotor disability. Now that's not dignified access to transport. But if there is supporting infrastructure in terms of elevated bus boarding platforms, ramps to access the elevated platforms, then dignified access can be ensured. And Surat is one city. The rapid bus transport system of Surat is a very, very accessible transport system because they provide this. They procure 900mm buses because they have a system where wheelchair users can access these elevated platforms with the use of ramps. Now, we are not saying that you only buy low-floor buses because we like boarding low-floor buses. We're saying that you provide us accessible transport infrastructure. And these high elevated boarding platforms are not available in any other city, to my knowledge. I could be wrong, but with the exception of Surat, these platforms are not available. Now, Bangalore, which had earlier tendered for 400mm buses, have now changed to 900mm, obviously because of the recent flooding in the country. But that can be no reason why we need to go in for low-floor buses. I mean, for years now, people with disabilities have been denied a dignified access to transport because of waterlogging, because of flooding in the streets, because of the speed breaker heights being too high, because of high transport, high maintenance cost of low-floor buses. Now, this is not acceptable anymore. And we need to make sure that transport, whatever it is made accessible to people with disability. If you buy 900mm buses, please ensure that you give us the required kind of boarding facilities. So this is a problem. In Chennai, there is an ongoing petition, the Rajiv Rajan matter, where, like I told you, the government filed an affidavit saying that only 10% of transport is to be made accessible. Now, this is an ongoing petition. So the court was informed that, no, this is not so. It's for all transport to be accessible. And so the government issued a government order saying that only 10% of the transport is going to be accessible. So the High Court asked the Tamil Nadu government that you go to the Supreme Court and seek a clarification in the Rajiv Rathuri matter. And so quickly the government withdrew that government order. But again, they have recently tendered for 1,170 buses, which are of 900mm. And this is for intercity transport. I mean, intracity transport. I'm not talking about intercity. This is the intracity transport for local transport. And this again, we have taken, the FMC has taken this to the court, and let's see what happens. Last week, the government filed an affidavit there, the Madras government, saying that we cannot provide low-floor buses until the allied infrastructure is made available. Now, who provides that allied infrastructure? So this is it. The battle is still on, and we hope that some resolution will happen. In Bangalore also, we are contemplating, the Freedom for Movement Coalition is contemplating agitating for this matter, taking the Bangalore Metropolitan Authority to the court, because we have everything in our favor now. We have the law, we have the standards, we have the policies. The will to implement is a little lacking. Thank you.
Thank you, Rajiv ji. It was very insightful. I would like to invite Sonal to quickly share her thoughts on, the impact or the targeted impact of such promising legislation to bring in inclusion in mobility sector.
Sure. I think Rajiji has really covered it also. I'm just going to add on one piece, which is that because I often advise on transport projects, and especially on how we can look at both gender and universal access in transport projects. One of the things that we have seen, and we try to use Section 34 of the Act, which actually looks at employment of persons with disabilities as well, because I think for us, it is also important to think of persons with disabilities not only as users, but as also service providers, right? So and one of the big challenges that we have had, and it's been very hard, is this general standard answer, which is that, oh, we are putting out these notices for recruitment, but we don't receive applications. And I think that therefore there is this gap between Act and implementation, where the things that need to be done, for example, partnering with organizations who train persons with disabilities and then kind of getting them into the transport agency can be done. I think those gaps still remain. So just kind of highlighting on the employment side of things related to the implementation of the Act.
Thanks, Sonu. That's also very, very important. Like, empowering is not only like giving them, like it's also to give them the opportunity and not only the access to those opportunities. Now, coming to the fourth question and the theme of the ITPD this year, as well as the webinar, innovation and technology are the overarching element which are now promoted to achieve inclusion in every sector, including mobility for persons with disability and other marginalized groups. Considering the challenges that that has been mentioned throughout the webinar regarding persons with disability and other marginalized groups, what are the prominent roadblocks in scaling up innovative policies and technology solutions with respect to inclusive mobility? For this, I would like to invite Ashwati to start to respond to this question.
Yeah, Kanika. Yeah, in terms of, like with the discussion that has been going on so far, I think when it comes to policies, we have an act in place itself. And to me, the most important features which are missing right now, which even, Rajiv ji kept saying with like the willpower to act. And it was also something, Mr. Hitesh Vaidya started by saying, the intention is being set out there, but right now the whole focus is on moving from intention to action. And to me, three things that really stick out. One is that now that we have an act in place, we really need to have strong action plans, which, even Sarika had mentioned, even if it's going to be put in and see how that can be brought into statutory practices such as the master plan, but having clear action plans which bring multiple departments together to deliver. Again, when Rajiv ji said, when the transport departments come back and say there is water logging or flooding, and as a result, you cannot have buses, these need to have comprehensive action plans which bring multiple departments to put together actions within a particular timeline. Now, having put together these action plans with targets, I think these need to be done particularly in a participatory planning method. So looking at how technology can also be brought in order to ensure that we have participation of persons with special abilities, so that we're getting their thoughts as we are putting this in place is very important. And here is where what Sonal mentioned about having champions within the system. If we have persons of disabilities within the system, then they can be champions, so that while we from outside are nudging and encouraging change, there are also champions within the system who are being a very strong part of the participation to ensure that we have these good action plans in place. And three, and very importantly, I feel that it's very important to have monitoring and evaluations done as well to see how much are we progressing towards the goals that we have set. And we need, I completely agree with Rajiv ji that 10% of our mobility cannot be accessible. All of our mobility should be accessible. When we have goals which say 30 by 30 for electrification, for everything that we need, we really need more progressive commitments as well. And while we speak about how 2/3 of our population are persons with maybe limited abilities, each one of us, all of us at an age will become a person with limited abilities. I have a grandmother at home who used to travel everywhere. She went up to the Himalayas, but today she can't step out because our cities do not allow for those kind of for persons with limited abilities to move independently and respectfully. So for me, these are the three important points, and I'll pass it back to you. Thanks, Kanika.
Thanks, Ashwati. Actually, I would like to just add on to your answer with one more question, which is you mentioned about community engagement and participatory approaches, and ITDP has done extensive work in this particular field in bringing making inclusive mobility as a mass movement. So can you just give your insights and share your experience on how we can actually bring in persons with disability and include the components of participatory planning and community engagement in mainstreaming inclusion in urban mobility system?
Yeah, thanks, Kanika. I think panelists will want to step out, so I'm going to also keep it very, very brief. So in multiple of our national programs or within our cities, we ensure that all the different stakeholders are brought on board. So when we do site visits, etc., with engineers, we make sure that persons with limited abilities or disabilities are brought on board as well, so that they can share experiences. Similarly, recently when we were doing a cycling program nationally, we were doing what were called these testings on the ground, and here again we made sure that communities are holistic, and persons with disabilities are also a part of the decision making itself. So I would say that that's very important, and to have various events, like, so while we look at implementation, while we look at policy making, communication and outreach and bringing these voices, mainstreaming them is very important. So that's another area that we focus. With that, I'm going to pass it on to the other speakers to make their comments as well. Thank you so much.
Sonal, you want to add something?
Yes, just very quickly, in terms of participatory engagements, access audits, these are a very powerful tool that can demonstrate how infrastructure is used by persons with different disabilities, and we've done it in multiple metro rail stations with persons in wheelchairs, persons with visual and hearing impairments. And often when you kind of even use, do the audit and use videos, these become very effective to communicate directly with decision makers. So I would certainly advocate for access audits as a key element in auditing and assessing all transport infrastructure.
Thanks, Sonal. I would also like to hear Apul's view on this particular aspect of community engagement and participation, but with one more question, which is like, how we can actually strengthen, like with all the work that OMI has been doing in conducting research and collecting disaggregated data with various intersectionalities in the sector of mobility, how we can actually strengthen the policy landscape for innovation in mobility sector, and what are the policy changes that are required to promote innovation and emerging assistive technology in urban mobility. So Apurv, over to you. I know that you have to leave in another 5 minutes, but if you can quickly share your thoughts on both of them.
Thank you, Kanika. It's been a wonderful discussion, and I hope that the thoughts that are shared find a place in action on the ground. To respond to your question in particular, Kanika, we've talked about this in bits and pieces. Hitesh Vaidyaji, towards the beginning, also had highlighted the importance for having robust data to inform decision making. But it has to be matched with a couple of things as well. Number one is, when we think about policy making, we have to think about policy making very holistically, in the sense that we don't only think about policy making in business as usual circumstances. They also have to find a place in disaster situations. And we've recently come out of the COVID pandemic. We know how different people were affected very, very differently. And some of these policies are very important to put in place, therefore. The second tool that is hugely underused is the public procurement system. I think there is a lot of opportunity to be unlocked, a lot of potential to be unlocked, if accessibility was made a mandate when it comes to public procurement. And this is not only to do with your physical infrastructure, it's also to do with the digital infrastructure that you put in place. Right now, we are in a very digital age. Some of the people have already mentioned how apps and websites are being extensively used. Therefore, this assumes all the more importance. Similarly, there is a need for us to have an indigenous solution. So, if we also focus on solutions designed in India, designed by India, and designed for India, by perhaps setting up a National Institute of Design or some similar body in a mainstream design organization, I think that will go a long way. Just a couple of other things. Sonal mentioned the need for accessibility audits. I think there's a huge scope for use of technology over here, and I'll give you a couple of ideas. We see buses plying our streets very regularly. Can they be fitted with cameras that take photographs of the built infrastructure around us? And can we use AI and computer vision to draw a map, accessibility map of the city? Can it be updated on an ongoing basis so we know where do we focus our resources? How do we focus our resources? Perhaps, something like drones or citizen journalism could also be used to capture some of these information. So I think there's a lot of scope for using technology for some of these accessibility interventions. Last two things is, I think along with accessibility audits, which is probably a post facto analysis, we also should think about having in place something like an accessibility impact assessment. Basically, for say projects of more than 100 crores in value, if we have a preemptive accessibility impact assessment, how will this affect accessibility? Is something breaking down? Is accessibility being improved? And having it as a mandatory requirement of the clearance for those projects. I think that's going to be super important. In all of this, I think taking together people with disabilities as users, as well as professional experts who will be familiar with assessment of accessibility measures is going to be very important and something that ought to be taken into account very systematically. Lastly, all of the thought sharing, ideation is in one place. But if the rubber has to meet the road, we have to have money along with it. And therefore, I think there's a huge need to pair our thought with financial allocation, budgetary allocation for accessibility improvements in physical and digital world. Till now, the budgetary allocations have been very meager. In fact, the last budgetary allocation that if I recall of 2019 was mere 14 rupees per person with disability. And I think this is something that we need to pay more attention to. I think as an aspiring developing economy, as an economy which has a target of $10 trillion by 2030, we have to invest in some of these infrastructure and we have to allocate dedicated pool of funds for this infrastructural changes. With that, I'll hand it over back to you, Kanika. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Apurv, and thanks for highlighting so many, interesting facts. And in fact, just yesterday I was reading the World Bank estimate, which is we'll be actually spending more than 55 billion every year in the development of infrastructure, urban infrastructure, which is a huge amount. And there's a need to actually, do it right the first time itself. Now, all the points you have mentioned actually brings, reminds me of Rajiv ji and our conversation a few days back, which is about, promotion of innovative technology for empowerment of persons with disability and their independent movement in and around the city. And I would like to hear from Rajiv ji, what are the prominent roadblock when we, when we want to scale up these innovative policies and technology, and how do you think, we can actually bring out the change?
Thank you, Kanika. Well, I think the roadblocks have all been highlighted, So it's basically that we need to have the allied supporting infrastructure when it comes to accessing transport services in a dignified manner. And this is something that has to be largely focused on and not really the height of the bus. Of course, we would love to have low-floor buses. They are smarter and world over they're being used. But if it's a 900mm bus, then there's infrastructure that has to be provided. And, we cannot keep on using waterlogging and high cost of maintenance and height of speed breakers. Calcutta says that speed breakers are very high. We can't use these as an excuse for not applying accessible buses. So the roadblocks are there and they can be addressed. Only the will has to be there to implement the roadblocks, sort of wipe out the roadblocks. I would like to touch upon another very important thing which has not been sort of flagged by our policymakers, and that is the transport accessibility of blind persons using public transport. Now, there are 5 million blind people in the country, and this is the 2011 census. If you look at the World Bank figures, which says that 15% of developing countries' population is disabled, and blind people in India will be much, much more. Now, when it comes to boarding a bus by a blind person in a city like Delhi, it can be a harrowing experience. Multiple buses coming at a particular point, high density of traffic. The blind man doesn't know which bus, where to locate, where to enter the bus from. So IIT Delhi has developed this product. It's the homing solution for onboarding blind passengers. And this has been tested in best buses in Bombay and DTC buses in Delhi with a 94% success rate. And the product specifications are with IIT Delhi. We have been wanting to implement this module in the intelligent transport systems being developed for our smart cities. We engaged with the Smart Cities Chennai in the month of June, had a long conversation with the IB group and the PwC who implementing the Smart City Chennai project. And we also had professors from IIT joining this meeting who developed this smart onboarding solution. And they were very interested in the product, but unfortunately they said the intelligent transport system onboarding has already happened in Chennai. But we've recently also had a meeting with, in October, in fact, our founder, Mr. Manocha, and Professor Balakrishnan from IIT Delhi, who collectively have developed this product onboard solution for blind passengers. They met Mr. Raj Cherubal, CEO of the Smart Cities Chennai project, and we are hopeful of things moving forward. We would certainly want NIUA to take a large interest in this particular thing because this needs to find place in our intelligent transport systems. It's not a very high cost product. It costs, I think, roughly around 15 to 20,000 a bus. And this needs to also be sort of flagged into our bus body codes, our standards for accessibility, because this is one issue which has just not been addressed in all these years. And honestly, if the transport systems are not accessible for people with disabilities in this country, then our smart cities will not remain smart. And I think we will also fall short of meeting our SDG goal 11. So that's what I had to add. And thank you so much for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you, Rajiv ji. Sarika, do you have any last minute thoughts or any concluding points which has been missed in the discussion so far?
I think I'm the most unfit person to point out the points which have not been addressed. But yes, I truly think that this was a very comprehensive discussion. All the points were very well covered. Just one small thing that I would like to mention about this community participation, community engagement aspect. I have always been very skeptical about this aspect, because I truly believe that if the participatory competence is not built amongst the community or the stakeholders from whom you're receiving the feedback or from whom, you're expecting some meaningful participation, then that participation is actually of not much use. But I make an exception in this case. In case of planning for, universal accessibility, in case of planning for people with disability in particular, you have to engage with them. Without that, all your policies and plans are going to fail. And this example that Avasthi gave earlier, that they actually made these, these public officials sit on wheelchairs and, roam on those particular pedestrian and the infrastructure, that was constructed for the wheelchair users to actually make them understand the impediments, the hurdles that are there. So that kind of a thing is really required. So for this thing, I completely, endorse this aspect of community participation, stakeholder engagement. It's very, very critical. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarika. Unfortunately, we will not be able to take any of the questions, but I could see that presenters and panelists have simultaneously responded to a few of the questions. I would request other, like the panelists and the presenters, to also look at the questions and address to the questions which has been which is relevant to you. Thank you, everyone. I would now like to invite Mr. Rajesh Suri, Senior Advisor, NIUA and Head of Inclusive City Center, to kindly give the concluding remarks, summarize the discussion today, and also give the vote of thanks. Thank you.
Thanks, Kanika. Onerous task to summarize the discussion. But let me start by congratulating my colleagues at Inclusive City Center at NIUA for organizing this webinar. on the International Day of Persons with Disability, focus on transformative solutions for inclusive development. We have been discussing mobility at large and public transport in particular. I completely agree with Sarika's observation. When we say inclusive public transport or inclusive mobility plan, we are referring to all marginalized segments of city population. Besides persons with disability, we are also referring to the children, women, the elderly, and the urban poor. And let me start by quoting from the apt quote in the concept note: a city which is well designed all, and this includes the persons with disability and is not restricted to them, but covers all the marginalized segments of the population. Inclusion has to be a cross-cutting approach in urban planning, as was adequately stressed by all presenters and the panelists. And we say a cross-cutting approach in planning. It covers various aspects of urban life and adopts a cross-sectoral approach. Urban transport in itself uh, uh, cannot achieve the goals of universal mobility if it is not supported by other infrastructure as well. Uh, it's adequately captured. Mobility constraints are a major obstacle to inclusion of the marginalized segments in the socio-economic development and cultural fabric of the society. And mobility improvements can help improve quality of life of persons with disabilities in particular. And the principles of inclusive transport planning have geographic coverage that's intersecting diverse types of settlements. And I think Sarika had raised this: affordability across economic strata and universal accessibility. Uh, when we say affordability across economic strata, Sarika pointed to the fact that not many transport companies are able to cover their costs. And she's referring to O&M costs from collection from the fare box. But then the principle of social cost benefit analysis kicks in. Or do you expect transport utilities to cover capital and O&M costs, which would then make services inaccessible, particularly for the urban poor? I leave every this thought, but I don't think any public transport company across the world is to cover even its O&M costs from the fare box collections. Uh, Technology and innovation definitely can play a key role in adopting these principles easily, and this was adequately presented by in the three presentations, including the real-time passenger info display system at public bus stops in the new My Udan, also the third presentation from Chennai. What came out very starkly was the need for end-to-end solutions to promote universal accessibility to public transport. I quote Apurva, and I like his term, the trip chain. How do you bring inclusion? How do you ensure inclusion in each component of the trip chain? Someone did mention that the pedestrian paths are not continuous, which is a huge roadblock people on the wheelchairs. Well, even for the able body person, it's a huge roadblock. Sarika mentioned about the example where a person in wheelchair has to uh, use the main carriageway because of inaccessibility of the dedicated pathway. What strikes me is, and this again is a pointer to integration of institutions, what intrigues me is the entire effort on Max Muller Road, if right, and that's the road outside India International Center. A huge effort had been to make the pathways continuous for persons with disability, people on the wheelchairs, people suffering from visual impairment. And it, soon one found out people were parking cars on this pathway. And in some of them, they thought we need to barricade these to prevent the cars from being parking. Now, once these are barricaded, how accessible are these for persons with disability? Huge question for everyone. Uh, and we are talking about end-to-end solution, origin to destination solution. What required for this? Or how do you bring the various pieces to complete the jigsaw puzzle? To my mind, and this again was highlighted by many of the panelists, you need the most appropriate institutional policy and legal framework for this holistic solution to challenge promoting universal accessibility or universal mobility. Chennai sets a good example whereby they have addressed policy, they have managed to address the policy gaps. They are doing an audit of infrastructure and service from the perspective of persons with disability and women. And let me expand it to the marginalized gender groups. The gap analysis, the theory of change. What is it that we are trying to achieve from a barrier-ridden mobility system to universally accessible mobility system? If that's the theory of change, what are the concrete steps that you need to take, which need to be enumerated in the action plan? And lastly, monitoring and evaluation would be an important part of this planning chain, if I can call it so. Uh, it's very evident acts and policies have not really transformed to impacts on ground. There are these good practices which are being implemented in isolation. The challenge, how do you scale up these innovations and technology to promote universal mobility? And I think the director in his welcome address had given the 5 mantras, which are data for decision, technology for transformation, which is most appropriate in local context, vertical and horizontal harmonization of planning processes, pathways, identifying the right pathways for transformation, the right combination, and partnerships and collective action. For this to happen, what is required is documentation of good practices and dissemination of learning and incorporating them in the capacity building efforts and advocacy efforts to change the mindset and to skill and to provide various institutions at the city level with the right skill sets and the mindset to implement such an approach. Let me stop here and back to you, Kanika.
Thank you so much, Mr. Suri. I would like to thank all our panelists, presenters, and the attendees for a meaningful and insightful discussion. I would also like to thank my team at ICC and particularly BASIC team. And the ITDP team, Sophia, Venu, Ashwati, and everyone who has supported to make this webinar a big success. At last, but not the least, I would like to thank Manisha and Atul for the